Hello YouTube, what's up? It's me, Maxter, and this is not Behind the Mod. This is basically a place where we will have modders talk about their opinions on issues or just topics in the Minecraft community. For this first episode of sorts, we have Asie. Hello.
Hello again.
And we are hopefully this interview will go a little bit better audio wise, and we're going to be talking about CurseForge and I guess licensing with mods.
Yes, there was this recent thing about licensing.
Yeah, if you follow AZ on Twitter or maybe look at Reddit, I think I forget which mod it was, but
Biome bundle.
Biome Bundle, yeah, which is yeah, basically get deleted off of CurseForge because of a licensing mishap.
Yeah, or rather not a licensing mishap, but a permission mishap. Essentially, what Biome Bundle was doing is it was redistributing a modified version of another mod, Terrain Control, as part of its own jar, which is allowed by the Terrain Control license, which is a very liberal license, the MIT license. However, CurseForge did not like it, so they pulled Biome Bundle down.
Yeah, and there was a lot of drama of sorts over this because there was confusion. The person who made Biome Bundle was basically saying that the mod does give permission for him to redistribute it, but I don't believe CurseForge understood that.
It's not as much about understanding as it is about a difference in opinion. Also, the drama was further fueled by the fact that the CurseForge moderator, who was removing Biome Bundle, accidentally also deleted a lot of content from the moderator's account. So he thought he was potentially banned for doing this, which of course made the flames burn even more.
Yeah. And this basically resulted in lots of people saying, "Oh, we should not put our mods on CurseForge. CurseForge is evil. It's the devil, whatever." But yeah, it has kind of reinvigorated the fire of like permissions and licensing because that's a never-ending thing that happens.
Yes, well, a lot of the thing about the difference between licensing and permissions is historical in nature. Technically speaking, licensing and permissions are the same thing. Both are a legally rooted way of governing what happens to the work you make. But in our community, there has been this distinction where licensing is the document that's included with the mod, the legal text, whereas the permissions are something you get from the mod offer, are explicitly granted rather than just, yes, yes, they're explicitly granted.
hmm And that has to do with a specific case, basically. Lots of modders like to do things on a case by case basis where they will review your mod, like Biome Bundle or your mod pack or whatever you're using their mod for, and decide whether or not they'll give you permission.
Yes, and that's what CurseForge expects. For things like this, they expect explicit permission from the mod offer to do certain things, such as modify a mod, which it has a very historical background, which goes back to the earliest days of modding, back in 2011, the Technic days. You see, this is the disclaimer here. This is information I've so-called rebuilt from Google, from reading forums, from talking to people. It is by no means entirely accurate. This is just what I know, what I think happened based on what I know.
Yeah, history can
So,
change things.
yes, also everyone has a slightly different perspective. So, back in the early modding days, nobody really paid much attention to this whole permission thing. There were no real licenses. People were just experimenting with the game. It was the early days, after all. Nobody really knew how far we can go with this whole modding thing. But one pack appeared, a few packs appeared, which started to consolidate those mods that were popping up into packs for less technically inclined people to be able to play with. One of them was the Soapbox, and a very famous one was Technic by Cakermix.
hmm
Now, Technic, it was one of the best packs, better packs at the time. It survived well into today, so that's a testament to its quality and brand. But Caker Mix, at least according to at least a few modders I've talked to, didn't really care much for the opinion of the modder who was using the mod. Now, Sometimes it was just an issue of the mod's license allowed him to do it, so he did whatever. But often, more often than not, it was a case of the mod didn't actually let you do it, and Technic just ignored the license at first because well, those were the early days. Nobody really knew what they were doing.
From what I understand, what Kaker said is basically he never expected Technic to be a what it was. So at that point, I think it never occurred to him to really ask for permissions, and that's kind of what kickstarted the whole thing.
Yeah, that's very possible because, as I said, those were the early days. Nobody really knew what they were doing, what it's going to end up being, and like who predicted that the modding scene would be so big with over 1,000 mods for one Minecraft version.
Hmm.
Um, so so I know that there was some issues with a few mods, which I'm not going to mention, but the most famous one is probably the fight between Senger and Forestry.
Yeah, the exploding bees, as many may remember it.
Yes. So nobody really knows what happened. What Senger says is that he reached out to Technic to ask for them politely to take down the mod, while Technic upholds that no such thing took place. But in the end, what happened is Senger pushed a version of Forestry, which had a special check to see if it was running on the Technic launcher. And if it did, it spawned special bees, which caused corruption to the world by explosions.
Hmm.
And that was highly effective. In under 6 hours, Forestry was removed from the Technic pack. But this made a lot of users notice that mod pack makers and mod makers were not exactly on friendly terms with each other in many cases.
Hmm.
So from that, FTB sprung up. FTB posed itself as the alternative. Instead of Technics, we only care about legal documents and major issues thing. They proposed that no, we're going to listen to you, to the modders, and we're going to listen to you very, very much so we don't infringe on any of your rights. And then FTB suddenly started becoming a viable alternative to Technic, with a fair share of modders even only granting rights to FTB to distribute their mods in a mod pack.
Hmm.
So the permissions thing worked out, but as a side effect of this whole thing, licenses didn't matter as much, as there were also some dramas where modders who were not aware of what the license constitutes didn't really realize what they were doing by putting a license on things. So all of those precedents in the early days set this thing, whereas to have true legitimacy, you need actual explicit permissions from a modder to distribute the mod or to modify it.
Hmm.
And since CurseForge was born out of a deal with Feed the Beast, it also took over FTB's culture and FTB's policies as a cultural thing. So it also includes the whole permissions thing.
Right. And CurseForge kind of basically their Curse and FTB are becoming more and more interlinked as I think the Curse launcher is replacing what used to be the FTB launcher, and as a result, the communities are basically conglomerating.
Yes, well, most of the Curse community is the FTB community, as well as Jaded Cat's packs. Jaded Cat left FTB and designs directly for Curse now. Or did. I'm not sure what's the current status.
Yeah. So with this, basically, Curse is now. I mean, you probably know what CurseForge is if you listen to this, but it's this huge repository for mods and this resource basically for mod authors to host their mods and even get rewarded with points that they can redeem for various things for their mod downloads. And this has created lots of basically kind of issues with well, as like the one we're talking about right now, with people who are uploading files to Curse and maybe their licensing or the permissions don't check out.
Yes, exactly, because there's this split between licensing and permissions, and I personally don't consider this to be a good thing. There's multiple reasons for that. First of all, I think that what should be done instead is just join licensing and permissions together and just, I don't know, share the information on how to write legally tolerable license files, which could
Hmm.
then serve as the permissions if someone wants to be really restrictive about their mod. They could just write a license which lets them be really restrictive about their mod. And see, the whole permissions thing creates a lot of issues. One that I particularly remember is Botania A New Dawn and the drama related to that. There was a time in which Vasky started nerfing a lot of features in Botania that were considered OP by the author and overpowered. And some users didn't like that. Some users didn't like the changes, and one of them eventually created a fork whose goal was to undo all of Vasky's changes.
Oh, I remember that.
And of course, the fork tried to go on CurseForge because that was the premier mod distribution platform, and well, the license allowed for it. So, and they did, and of course, not too long after, I think a few days later, the mod was taken down for not having explicit permission to do so. And then Vasky came along and actually said that explicit permission is given. And so the mod was restored. But a day later, the mod disappeared again. And I think to this day, it is not available on CurseForge.
So there was this like miscommunication between Vosky and CurseForge.
Very possibly. However, that also shows the issues that explicit permissions create. One of the things that worries me is that this means that, at least in the context of CurseForge, we as modders don't actually have full control over our mods. We do get extra control, like we're being protected by CurseForge, but not everyone wants that.
You have to agree to terms.
Yes, I have to agree to the terms, and of course, CurseForge gives a lot of benefits for those terms, but I don't think those terms, or rather the policies, are perfect. While I do understand some of the reasons, like trying to reduce user confusion by not letting 20 forks of one mod be rampant, or by having a mod conflict with another mod which happens to have the same mod inside itself. I entirely understand the user confusion aspect of CurseForge because CurseForge is trying to not just be a modpack distribution platform and mod distribution platform, it also tries to be user friendly.
Right. I mean,
And go on.
oh, sorry. Well, yeah, one of the big things about CurseForge, it's weird because they also run Curse, which is a lot, which is, I think, supposed to be more user-facing, but CurseForge actually is, at least in my opinion, easier to use for people who more know what they're doing, like modpack authors or mod authors.
Yes, the Minecraft main site is called Curse, so I just call it CurseForge because that's what I'm used to as a modder, I suppose. But the main technically the user-facing site is called Curse. But yeah, that's not too important for this conversation. So, if we want to talk about those licensing and permissions things, we have to ask ourselves some questions. First of all, is the user convenience worth the cases of developers, not just mod makers, but mod pack makers, having problems they run into with the policies that are enacted? For instance, there was this one issue with Buildcraft. As a former maintainer, I know a bit more about this. So Buildcraft has had a lot of issues porting to 1.8 historically.
Hmm.
And eventually, we finally managed to get it right, thanks to the amazing help of Alex, IIL, but the builds were still very unstable, so they were only available on mod-buildcraft.com and on his GitHub earlier. Because while we have this policy where CurseForge is essentially a mirror of mod-buildcraft.com, and to fit into the whole user convenience thing, we only publish builds we trust to be reasonably stable on Curse. But that meant the 1.8 builds were still not there yet. However, 1.8 packs were already popping up, and we started hearing complaints that mod pack makers cannot get 1.8 Buildcraft in their CurseForge packs.
Huh.
And it was a bit problematic because I later found out, thanks to one of the modpack authors, that the reason was that CurseForge has an internal policy where if there's a mod on CurseForge, you cannot upload a third-party mod. That is, you cannot add a custom jar file for a mod which also has a CurseForge project. If a
Hmm.
mod is on Curse, you can only use the builds for the mod which are available on Curse. Unless, of course, you get explicit permission.
So you,
However, oh, go on.
sorry, no, sorry, continue.
However, Buildcraft cannot really give out explicit permissions. Well, in sneaky way it could, but to give explicit permission, you would need explicit permission from everyone who owns the code base, and I think that right now that's over 100 people.
Yeah.
We never enacted a contributor's license agreement.
So it's really messy when you have that many people involved on one
Yes,
project.
so I couldn't just give them explicit permission, and I couldn't really tell CurseForge I'm giving permission because, well, that would be a lie. So instead, I had to resort to another way and just make a post about it on the Buildcraft blog stating the whole opinion in detail. And sure enough, a few days later, I started getting reports that Buildcraft is being allowed as a third party mod as well.
Hmm.
But that's not a solution for everyone. While Buildcraft is a huge mod and it has the power to change policies just because of its size, even though it's not as big as it used to be. But if you're like a small mod author, like your mod has 1,000 or 2,000 downloads, you might be unable to change anything at all. And since CurseForge sets some licensing rules for you, if you're not big enough, you might just not be able to go past that if you want your mod to be more open, for instance.
Yeah, it's not like on GitHub where you can just put your mod on there and give it a specific license and say, hey, if you follow this license, you can do whatever you want.
Yes, well, on CurseForge, like you can put up a license, but if you want to anything that's not that's not common sense allowed by the traditions of the community, and that's how I would put it. You need to have explicit permission.
Mm-hmm.
And as I
Like,
said, I understand where they're coming from, both from the fact that there's this fear about modders coming back from the Technic days where mod- modders were running rampant and taking down mods which they didn't like that hooked into their APIs, like that Red Power Industrial Craft converter back in the day, or Exploding Bees, or the MDIO versus Gregtech debacle. There's been a lot of drama, and I understand exactly why some groups are very wary of anything like this happening to their stuff, because in the end, it's the users and later the mod pack who suffer from this, not the modder.
yeah, there's just basically Minecraft did not modded Minecraft did not start cleanly, and it's never been really clean or simple in terms of its policies and traditions. So it's kind of hard, I guess, for anyone to keep up with all that history. In addition to licensing.
Yes, in which case FTB and Alt 80 Launcher choose the safe side, which is always verify whether someone has the right to do something, though 80 Launcher is usually happy with just the licensing, while FTB and CurseForge sometimes require a bit more. And Technic chose the reckless side, where they just allow anything and have a takedown form if you see something that infringes your policies.
Yeah, well, I think Technic's more unique because it's more of Technic is the only really platform. I think ATL and FTB are more curated experiences.
Yes, but it creates the same issues that bazaars of this kind have. Like a good analogy is the iOS App Store versus the Android market or the Play Store.
Yeah.
The iOS App Store is a lot more curated, so the average quality of software on it is higher.
Hmm.
However, on the Android market, you have many interesting tools that you would never have on the iOS App Store, despite there being a lot more, well, junk software or software created just to earn a quick buck, with even bots sometimes.
Yeah, it's yeah, I think that's a really interesting analogy, especially considering that lots of like you can look at the Play Store too, and there's been issues even with that of DMCA's with people basically uploading copies or of apps or claiming to be apps that they're really not, and uh have being a fraud. It's not quite the same, I think, because in Minecraft, users aren't paying money for all the time, or at all, essentially for mods. But it is still a very messy issue because of how many, I guess, ways there are. I mean, we just mentioned Technic, ATL, FTB. All of these communities exist, and they all operate slightly differently.
Yes, and as I said, I'm personally an advocate for treating licenses and letting modders have the freedom to set the rules, even with the responsibility that it comes with. So, if you choose your mod to be free software, then that usually gives you some developers willing to help you out sometimes if they find an issue. But in turn, you cannot really come complaining when someone takes your mod and makes a fork of it because you agreed to it by setting the license.
Yeah, the license is not really something you can. It's weird because you have the license, but then you also have these exceptions to the license that you have to make in some cases.
Yes, well, there's exceptions. Well, you can always make exceptions which grant additional rights. That's what permissions technically are, but that's also just a part of licensing. You can just give someone a different, less restrictive license. That happens sometimes, even in software development.
Hey, sorry about that. Life happens. Had to make a quick cut, but we're back. Anyway, so about licenses.
Yes, so as I said earlier, essentially, I'm of the opinion that modders should have more power to dictate how their work is used, but also be more aware of the effects that putting a license has. After all, if you put something on the internet under a specific license, you cannot really revoke that license unless you're really specific about your terms, in which case people will be wary of using the mod.
Yeah, and in the age of open source, that's caused issues not just in Minecraft, but with lots of other projects as well, and it can get messy.
I mean, the whole bucket thing amounted to not choosing the license correctly.
Yeah, and that was that involved Mojang and it was really complicated. Basically, Mojang had I think they owned the Bucket license because they hired the people from Bucket,
Not
but
really. They hired the people from Bucket and they had the rights to Bucket, but they didn't have rights to all the Bucket code, as like Buildcraft and other projects created early on. It didn't have a contributor's license agreement. So every contributor owned their own code. And it just so happened that one of the contributors found a flaw in the way it was licensed because one of the parts of Bucket was licensed under the GPL, which does not let you link to code which is not under a compatible license. And Minecraft is obviously closed source, so it's not a compatible license.
mhm.
In which case, he decided that with Mojang coming in to try to take over Bucket after everyone left, he decided to try and essentially stop the whole thing by sending a DMCA because stating that his rights are being violated by a license that he himself helped enact as he was around early on at the time.
Yeah, and that basically killed the whole Bucket project.
Yes, because now actually it's a bit tricky because Spigot worked around it in a very clever way, since it's the linking of the open code to the closed code which causes the violation and the illegal part to occur.
Hmm.
So distributing the two projects separately is fine, and what Spigot does is they distribute a toolchain which downloads the source code files for Spigot and decompiles Minecraft and links the two together and then creates a working version of Spigot. So Spigot does nothing that violates the license. They don't link to the closed source code and they have the plausible deniability ready. The only violator is then the user, but that's fine because nobody's going to DMC a user for just using a version of Spigot that has some weird legal issues.
Yeah, and Spigot is yeah, and that's created all sorts of forks with people like server owners who want to run with mods. Have done stuff with like Cauldron, basically combining Forge and
Well,
Bucket
the
or
Cauldron forks are
Spigot.
a bit different. The Cauldron forks don't use such intricate technology. They just host on lesser known websites and hope that they don't get noticed, which they won't because the person who took down Bucket doesn't care that much.
It's kind of like the whole EULA thing with servers. Some servers tried to just get by under the radar, hoping they could do what they were doing.
Yes, it's generally licensing is a very complicated subject, and often I contact people about it just because I know how difficult it can be. Although I'm not a lawyer myself, but I've had a fair share of experiences with various licenses, so I try to help out when I can. Like when I notice a GitHub project that has no license on it, which at least in the US makes default to all rights reserved, you can do nothing. So I asked them and asked, hey, could you put a license on this? Here's my recommendation, judging by your the scope of your work and stuff.
Hmm.
And sometimes it works. Like in, I think the case of Carpenter's blocks, it helped out, and a few other mods which set their license based on someone reporting to them that they have no license. So that helps clear things up. If someone uses a pre-existing license, they can be reasonably sure that it's legally tested by actual companies.
Yeah, with Minecraft, lots of modders obviously don't really. I mean, they're not professionals. They're just people minding the game, and some less experienced people aren't familiar with licensing. So I think it's a big kind of weird thing for them when they just hear, "Oh, wait, someone's using my mod in a way I don't want them to," or someone can't use my mod legally because of something that I have that I didn't have anything to do with. It kind of forces them to have that role of managing their license.
Yes, as I said, and I think that's going to be my closing thought. When when we have this distinction between licensing and permissions, its goal is to essentially ensure that the modders never do anything wrong. So it takes away the need to be responsible about their mods just because they know that the modpack group or mod distribution service will come in their defense if something that could potentially hurt them happens.
Hmm.
But I think that we should be moving away from that and instead trying to try to accept the responsibility of proper licensing, because it makes things easier for modders as they can fully control how their mod gets used. If they want to be restrictive about it, they can do it, and if they want to be fully open about it, they can also do it. It helps modpack makers because with licensing, you can just read the license or read a summary of the license and be more or less aware as to where you're legally standing, whether you can use the mod or not, whether it allows using in commercial settings or not, whether it allows modifying it or not, whether it allows for distribution.
Yeah, when you let a platform basically use your license, or basically tell you the terms, it may be easier, but you have to be aware that there's things that you're not controlling and the things that can happen, and that's what we saw recently.
Yes, and it also helps the users because just like modpack makers, they can easily read a document which states all the rights that are given out. Well, with permissions, it's mostly the same thing. It's just that the split feels very artificial, and especially saying that licenses are not the governor in some cases, which is absolutely silly in my view. Though, as I said, to defend CurseForge and similar services, I understand that things like distributing modified versions of mods under a similar name, they can cause confusion to users, but it are the few cases of user confusion and stopping them worth the benefits we could get from a more open and collaborative community?
Yeah, and I do hope that more and more people understand licensing and use it properly, whether they're hosting a mod on their website, GitHub, or whatever, because it matters.
Yes, it really matters. I have personally seen at least one case where someone regretted their choice of license, and modding community no less.
Hmm. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. But thank you so much for coming on today to talk about licensing and your opinions on it. And do you have any more closing thoughts you'd like to say?
Yes, I would definitely like to say that thank you for inviting me here. It was a pleasure to be able to talk to you once more.
No problem. And I hope all you guys watching that enjoyed as well. Thank you so much. If you really like this, we'll do more of these with AZ or whoever. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you, AZ, for coming on. And see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.
See you, maybe.